The words hung in the air between them, like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Eugene Long stood in the doorway of his apartment, his best friend Alexander Ramirez inches away, close enough that Eugene could see the golden flecks in Alexander's dark eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. Alexander's hand was still cupped against Eugene's cheek, thumb brushing across his cheekbone with a tenderness that made Eugene's heart twist in his chest. "Maybe let me," Alexander had whispered. And those three words had opened a door that neither of them could close. Eugene's breath caught in his throat as he searched Alexander's face, looking for any sign that this was some cruel joke, some misunderstanding. But there was nothing but sincerity in Alexander's expression, nothing but want and fear and hope all tangled together in a way that made Eugene feel like the world had tilted on its axis. "Alexander," Eugene breathed, his voice barely audible. "What are you saying?" Alexander's thumb continued its gentle path across Eugene's cheek, and Eugene found himself leaning into the touch despite every instinct telling him to pull away, to protect himself from the inevitable heartbreak. Because this couldn't be real. After 3 years of friendship, 3 years of watching Alexander date woman after woman, 3 years of pretending his own feelings didn't exist, this couldn't actually be happening. But Alexander's touch felt real. The electricity sparking between them felt real. The way Alexander was looking at him like he was seeing Eugene for the first time felt devastatingly real. "I'm saying," Alexander murmured, his voice rough with emotion, "that maybe I've been looking for the wrong things in all the wrong places. Maybe what I've been searching for has been right here the whole time." Eugene's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the door frame tighter, his knuckles white with the effort of staying upright. "Alexander, you're straight. You've always been straight. You dated Sarah for 2 years, and before that there was Maria, and—" "I know what I've done," Alexander interrupted softly, "but I also know how I feel right now standing here with you, and I know that every relationship I've ever had felt like I was playing a role, like I was trying to be someone I wasn't." His other hand came up to frame Eugene's face completely. "With you, I don't have to pretend to be anyone else. I can just be me." Eugene closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the sensation of Alexander's hands on his skin, by the words he'd dreamed of hearing for so long. When he opened them again, Alexander was still there, still looking at him with that same mixture of vulnerability and determination. "Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. This story is about to take you on an emotional journey you won't forget. But to understand how they had arrived at this moment, standing in Eugene's doorway with 3 years of unspoken feelings finally spilling into the open, we have to go back to where it all began. 3 months earlier, Eugene had been sitting at his kitchen table, nursing his third cup of coffee and trying to focus on the quarterly reports spread across his laptop screen. The numbers blurred together as his mind wandered, a common occurrence lately. He'd been distracted for weeks, ever since Alexander had started dating his latest girlfriend, a bubbly marketing executive named Jessica, who seemed to collect vintage teacups and had opinions about everything. The sound of his apartment door opening pulled Eugene from his thoughts. Only one person had a key, and sure enough, Alexander appeared in the kitchen doorway moments later, his hair disheveled and his expression stormy. "She broke up with me," Alexander announced without preamble, dropping into the chair across from Eugene with a heavy sigh. Eugene felt his heart do something complicated in his chest, a twisted combination of sympathy for his friend's pain and a terrible, guilty relief that Jessica was no longer in the picture. "What happened?" Alexander ran his hands through his hair, making it stick up at odd angles. "She said I was emotionally unavailable, that I held her at arm's length and never really let her in." He laughed bitterly. "She said it felt like I was going through the motions, like my heart wasn't really in it." Eugene closed his laptop, giving Alexander his full attention. This conversation felt familiar, almost like a script they'd performed too many times before. Alexander would date someone for a few months, things would seem to be going well, and then inevitably the relationship would end with some variation of the same complaint. Alexander wasn't fully present, wasn't emotionally invested, wasn't letting them close enough. "I'm sorry," Eugene said, and he meant it. He hated seeing Alexander hurt. even if part of him had never understood why Alexander kept pursuing relationships that clearly weren't fulfilling him. Alexander leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. The thing is, she wasn't wrong. I wasn't really there. Not completely. I kept waiting to feel something more, something deeper, but it never came. He looked at Eugene then, his expression troubled. Why do you think that is? Why can't I seem to connect with anyone? Eugene's throat felt tight. This was dangerous territory, the kind of conversation that made him want to flee to his bedroom and hide under his covers until Alexander left. Because Eugene knew exactly why Alexander couldn't connect with the women he dated. But it wasn't his place to say it. It wasn't his secret to reveal. Maybe you just haven't found the right person yet, Eugene offered carefully. Maybe, Alexander said, but he didn't sound convinced. Or maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm just not capable of the kind of love other people seem to find so easily. The pain in Alexander's voice made Eugene's chest ache. Without thinking, he reached across the table and covered Alexander's hand with his own. There's nothing wrong with you. You're one of the best people I know. Alexander's eyes dropped to their joined hands, and Eugene realized what he'd done. He started to pull away, but Alexander turned his hand palm up, threading their fingers together. You always know what to say, Alexander murmured. You always make me feel better. Eugene's heart hammered against his ribs. Alexander's hand was warm in his, calloused from his weekend rock climbing adventures, familiar in a way that made Eugene's chest tight with longing. They'd touched before, casual contact between friends, but this felt different, more intentional. That's what friends are for, Eugene managed, his voice slightly hoarse. Alexander's thumb brushed across Eugene's knuckles, a gentle back-and-forth motion that sent electricity shooting up Eugene's arm. Is it weird that you're the only person I feel completely comfortable with? The only person I can be myself around without feeling like I'm performing? Eugene's breath caught. Alexander. I mean it, Alexander continued, his eyes finding Eugene's again. With everyone else, it's like I'm wearing a mask, playing a part. But with you, I can just exist. I don't have to try to be charming or impressive or anything other than exactly who I am. Eugene felt like he was drowning. Alexander's words were everything he'd ever wanted to hear and everything he was terrified of hearing and all at once, because there was something in Alexander's voice, something in the way he was looking at Eugene that felt like more than friendship. But Eugene had been down this road before, reading too much into innocent moments, and he couldn't survive having his heart broken again. You don't have to perform for anyone, Eugene said quietly. The right person will love you exactly as you are. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his thumb still tracing patterns across Eugene's knuckles. What about you? Why don't you ever date anyone? The question hit Eugene like a physical blow. He tried to pull his hand away, but Alexander held on, his grip gentle but firm. I date, Eugene said weakly. When? I've known you for 3 years, and I've never seen you with anyone. You never talk about crushes or relationships or even casual hookups. Alexander's voice was soft, curious rather than accusatory. Sometimes I wonder if you're afraid to let anyone get close. Eugene's laugh came out sharp and bitter. Maybe I am. Why? The simple question hung between them, loaded with 3 years of unspoken truths. Eugene stared at their joined hands, at the way Alexander's fingers fit perfectly between his own, and felt something crack open in his chest. Because, Eugene said slowly, sometimes when you let people in, they see things you're not ready for them to see. Sometimes they figure out truths you're not ready to share. Alexander leaned forward, his free hand reaching out to touch Eugene's chin, tilting his face up until their eyes met. What truth are you afraid of sharing? Eugene's heart was beating so fast he was sure Alexander could hear it. The kitchen felt too small, too warm, too charged with electricity. Alexander's touch was gentle but insistent, and Eugene found himself drowning in the dark depths of his best friend's arms. Alexander, Eugene whispered, his voice breaking on the name. Tell me, Alexander said softly. Whatever it is, you can tell me. Eugene closed his eyes, gathering courage he didn't know he possessed. When he opened them again, Alexander was still there, still looking at him with that same patient, caring expression that had been Eugene's undoing from the very beginning. I'm gay, Eugene said, the words falling from his lips like stones into still water. Alexander went very still, his thumb freezing mid-stroke across Eugene's knuckles. Eugene waited for him to pull away, to let go of his hand, to make some excuse about needing to leave. Instead, Alexander's grip tightened slightly. How long have you known? Alexander asked quietly. Always, I think, but I've been sure since college. Eugene's voice was barely above a whisper. You're the first person I've ever told. Alexander's expression was unreadable, but he didn't let go of Eugene's hand. Why me? Why now? Eugene felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Because you asked, because I'm tired of hiding. Because, he took a shaky breath, because I trust you. They sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, Alexander processing Eugene's revelation, while Eugene tried to prepare himself for whatever came next. Finally, Alexander spoke. Thank you for telling me, he said simply. That couldn't have been easy. Eugene let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. You're not freaked out? Alexander smiled then, the first genuine smile Eugene had seen from him all evening. Why would I be freaked out? You're still you. You are still my best friend. This doesn't change anything between us. But even as Alexander said the words, Eugene could see something shifting in his expression, some new awareness dawning in his eyes. Alexander was looking at him differently now, seeing him in a new light, and Eugene wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a terrifying thing. Does this mean you've been attracted to men this whole time? Alexander asked, his voice carefully neutral. Eugene nodded, not trusting his voice. Have you ever been attracted to someone specific? Someone you know? The question felt loaded, dangerous. Eugene searched Alexander's face for some clue about where this was heading, but Alexander's expression remained carefully controlled. Yes, Eugene admitted. Anyone I know? Eugene's heart stopped. This was it, the moment where he could either lie and preserve their friendship or tell the truth and risk losing everything. Alexander's hand was still warm in his, still holding on, and maybe that meant something. Maybe it was a sign that it was safe to be honest. Yes, Eugene whispered. Alexander leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Who? Eugene looked into Alexander's eyes, saw something there that might have been hope, or might have been curiosity, or might have been something else entirely. He thought about all the times Alexander had complained about feeling disconnected from his girlfriends, all the times he'd said he felt like he was performing rather than being genuine. He thought about the way Alexander looked at him sometimes, like he was seeing something he couldn't quite name. You, Eugene breathed. The word hung in the air between them like a confession and a prayer. Alexander went completely still, his eyes widening slightly, but he didn't let go of Eugene's hand. Me? Alexander's voice was barely audible. Eugene nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. He waited for Alexander to pull away, to make excuses, to flee. Instead, Alexander's grip on his hand tightened. For how long? Since the day we met, Eugene admitted. Since you walked into Professor Martinez's literature class 3 years ago and sat down next to me and asked if you could borrow a pen. Alexander stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his features. 3 years, he said slowly. You've been attracted to me for 3 years. I'm sorry, Eugene said quickly. I know it's weird and inappropriate, and I never should have said anything. I can move out if you want, find somewhere else to live. Eugene, oh. Alexander's voice cut through his rambling. Stop. Eugene fell silent, his heart hammering against his ribs as he waited for Alexander's judgment. Don't apologize, Alexander said softly, and don't you dare move out. He paused, his thumb resuming its gentle path across Eugene's knuckles. Can I ask you something? Eugene nodded, not trusting his voice. All those times you listened to me complain about my relationships, all those times you gave me advice about women, how did that feel? Eugene's laugh came out hollow and pained, like a knife turning in my chest every single time. Alexander winced. I'm sorry, I had no idea. How could you have known? I never gave you any reason to think. Eugene trailed off, shaking his head. I got good at hiding it. Maybe too good, Alexander murmured, so quietly Eugene almost didn't hear him. They sat in silence again, the weight of Eugene's confession settling between them like a living thing. Eugene studied Alexander's face, trying to read his expression, trying to figure out what he was thinking. Alexander looked thoughtful, almost contemplative, like he was working through some complex equation in his head. "Alexander?" Eugene said finally. "Are you okay?" Alexander looked up at him, and Eugene was surprised to see something that looked almost like relief in his eyes. "I think I might be more than okay." Alexander said slowly. "I think some things are starting to make sense." "What do you mean?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, his gaze dropping to their still joined hands. "All those relationships that felt like performance. All those times I felt disconnected and emotionally unavailable. What if it wasn't because there was something wrong with me? What if it was because I was with the wrong people?" Eugene's heart began to race. "Alexander, what if the reason I could never fully connect with any of them was because the person I was supposed to connect with was sitting right here the whole time?" The words hit Eugene like a physical blow. He stared at Alexander, searching his face for any sign that this was some kind of cruel joke. But all he saw was sincerity and a growing sense of wonder. "You're straight," Eugene said weakly. "My?" Alexander asked. "Because right now, sitting here with you, learning that you've been attracted to me for 3 years, I don't feel straight. I feel like I'm finally understanding something about myself that I've been blind to for way too long." Eugene felt like he couldn't breathe. "What are you saying?" Alexander lifted their joined hands, pressing a soft kiss to Eugene's knuckles that sent electricity shooting through Eugene's entire body. "I'm saying that maybe I need to stop assuming I know who I am and start paying attention to how I actually feel." Eugene's vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall. "And how do you feel?" Alexander met his eyes, and Eugene saw something there that made his heart stop and start again in the same moment. "Curious," Alexander said softly. "Hopeful. Terrified." He paused, his thumb tracing across Eugene's knuckles again. "Attracted." The last word was barely a whisper, but it hit Eugene like a shout. He stared at Alexander, trying to process what he was hearing, trying to believe that this was actually happening. "Attracted to me?" Eugene asked, his voice breaking. Alexander nodded slowly. "I think I have been for a while. I just didn't know how to recognize it, didn't know what it meant." He laughed softly, the sound tinged with amazement. "All those times I felt most comfortable, most like myself, they were with you. All those times I felt genuinely happy and content. You were there." Eugene felt like he was floating, like the ground had disappeared from beneath his feet. "Alexander." "I know this is a lot," Alexander said quickly. "I know this changes everything, and I know you probably need time to process, and I don't want to pressure you or make you uncomfortable." "You're not making me uncomfortable," Eugene interrupted. "You're making me hope for something I never thought I could have." Alexander's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. "What do you hope for?" Eugene looked at their joined hands, at Alexander's face, at the way the afternoon light was streaming through the kitchen window and making everything look golden and possible. "You," Eugene said simply. "I hope for you." Alexander's breath caught, and for a moment they just stared at each other across the small kitchen table. 3 years of unspoken feelings finally out in the open between them. Then Alexander was standing, still holding Eugene's hand, gently pulling him to his feet as well. They stood facing each other in the kitchen, close enough that Eugene could see the flecks of gold in Alexander's dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Alexander's free hand came up to cup Eugene's cheek, his thumb brushing across his cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "Can I try something?" Alexander asked softly. Eugene nodded, not trusting his voice. Alexander leaned in slowly, giving Eugene plenty of time to pull away if he wanted to. But Eugene didn't want to pull away. He'd been dreaming of this moment for 3 years, and now that it was finally happening, he never wanted it to end. Their lips met in the softest brush of contact, tentative and questioning. Alexander pulled back slightly, searching Eugene's face, and Eugene realized he was looking for permission to continue. "Please," Eugene whispered. Alexander smiled and kissed him again, deeper this time, more certain. Eugene's free hand came up to fist in Alexander's shirt, anchoring himself as the world tilted around them. Alexander tasted like coffee and possibility, and Eugene felt like he was drowning in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Alexander rested his forehead against Eugene's. Wow, Alexander breathed. Yeah, Eugene agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Wow. They stood there for a moment, foreheads touching, sharing breath and space, and the overwhelming realization that everything between them had just shifted in the most fundamental way possible. I should probably tell you, Alexander said softly, that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. Eugene laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. Neither do I. We can figure it out together. Alexander pulled back to look at him, his expression serious. Are you sure? This is all new for me, and I don't want to hurt you while I'm figuring myself out. Eugene considered the question, thought about the 3 years he'd spent loving Alexander in silence, thought about the way Alexander had looked at him when he'd confessed his feelings, thought about the gentle way Alexander had kissed him just moments before. I'm sure, Eugene said. I've been sure about you for 3 years. I can be sure for both of us while you catch up. Alexander's smile was brilliant. I think I'm catching up faster than you might expect. And then he was kissing Eugene again, and Eugene forgot about everything else except the feeling of Alexander's lips against his, the way Alexander's hands felt cupping his face, the way 3 years of longing was finally being answered. Over the following weeks, they fell into a new rhythm together, one that felt both completely natural and thrillingly new. Alexander was curious about everything, asking questions about Eugene's experiences, about what it meant to be gay, about how long Eugene had known, about whether he'd ever been with anyone else. Eugene answered as honestly as he could, patient with Alexander's learning process, grateful beyond words that Alexander wanted to learn at all. They took things slowly, both of them navigating uncharted territory. Alexander was still figuring out his sexuality, still coming to terms with the fact that everything he thought he knew about himself had been wrong. Eugene was learning how to be loved back after years of one-sided longing, learning how to trust that this was real and not some elaborate dream. Their first real date was to a small cafe downtown, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls, where they could sit in a corner booth and talk for hours without being bothered. Alexander was nervous, fidgeting with his napkin and stumbling over his words in a way that Eugene found endearing. I've never been on a date with a man before, Alexander admitted over coffee and shared pastries. I've never been on a date with you before, Eugene replied. I think that's more important. Alexander smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. How long have you wanted this? Not just being attracted to me, but actually being with me like this. Eugene considered the question, thinking back over the years of friendship, the years of watching Alexander with other people and wishing it could be him instead. Since about a week after we met, Eugene said honestly, there was this moment when you fell asleep on my couch during a study session, and I realized I wanted to take care of you forever. That's when I knew it was more than just attraction. Alexander reached across the table to take his hand. I'm sorry it took me so long to catch up. You're here now, Eugene said simply. That's what matters. Their second date was a movie, some action thriller that neither of them paid much attention to because they were too busy being aware of each other in the dark theater. Alexander held Eugene's hand the entire time, his thumb tracing patterns across Eugene's knuckles in a gesture that was becoming familiar and beloved. Their third date was a walk through the park near their apartment, talking about everything and nothing while the autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet. Alexander stopped suddenly in the middle of the path, turning to face Eugene with an expression of wonder. I keep waiting for this to feel wrong, Alexander said. I keep expecting to wake up and realize I've made some huge mistake. But it doesn't feel wrong. It feels like the most right thing I've ever done. Eugene's heart swelled with love and relief. Good, he said, because I don't think I could survive losing you now that I finally have you. Alexander stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame Eugene's face. You're not going to lose me. I'm exactly where I want to be. And then he was kissing Eugene again, right there in the middle of the park with joggers and dog walkers and families passing by. And Eugene realized that Alexander wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't ashamed or uncertain. He was proud to be with Eugene, proud to be figuring out this new part of himself. The moment that changed everything happened. Happened on a Thursday night 3 weeks after their first kiss. They were back in Eugene's kitchen, the same place where everything had started, making dinner together and talking about their days. Alexander was chopping vegetables while Eugene stirred sauce on the stove, and the domestic normalcy of it all made Eugene's chest tight with happiness. "I talked to my sister today," Alexander said casually, not looking up from his cutting board. Eugene glanced over at him. "How is Betty?" "Good. She asked about you, actually. Wanted to know why I sounded so happy lately." Alexander paused in his chopping, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I told her about us." Eugene nearly dropped his spoon. "You told her?" Alexander nodded, finally looking up to meet Eugene's eyes. "I told her that I'm dating my best friend and that I've never been happier in my life." Eugene felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "What did she say?" "She said she always wondered why none of my girlfriends seemed to make me genuinely happy. She said she could tell there was something missing, but she could never figure out what it was." Alexander set down his knife and moved to stand behind Eugene, wrapping his arms around his waist and resting his chin on Eugene's shoulder. "She said she's never heard me talk about anyone the way I talk about you." Eugene leaned back into Alexander's embrace, overwhelmed by the feeling of being held, being wanted, being loved. "How do you talk about me?" "Like you hung the moon," Alexander murmured against his ear. "Like you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Like I can't imagine my life without you in it." Eugene turned in Alexander's arms, the sauce forgotten on the stove. "Alexander." "I love you," Alexander said simply, the words falling from his lips like they'd been waiting there forever. "I'm in love with you, Eugene. I think I have been for a long time. I just didn't know how to recognize it." Eugene felt like his heart might burst from his chest. After 3 years of loving Alexander in silence, after weeks of tentative exploration and careful hope, hearing those words felt like coming home. "I love you too," Eugene whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've loved you for so long, I forgot what it felt like not to love you." Alexander's smile was radiant as he cupped Eugene's face in his hands. "We're really doing this, aren't we? We're really together." "We're really together," Eugene confirmed, and then Alexander was kissing him again, deep and passionate and full of promise. They forgot about dinner entirely, too caught up in each other to care about anything else. Alexander backed Eugene against the counter, his hands tangled in Eugene's hair, and Eugene felt like he was drowning in the best possible way. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered endearment felt like a gift he'd never expected to receive. "I want to tell everyone," Alexander said when they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily. "I want the whole world to know that you're mine." Eugene's heart soared. "Are you sure? You don't want to take more time to figure things out?" Alexander shook his head. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Eugene. I want to be with you. I want everyone to know it." And he meant it. Over the following days, Alexander told everyone who mattered, his family, his co-workers, their mutual friends. He introduced Eugene as his boyfriend with obvious pride, his hand always finding Eugene's, his arm always around Eugene's shoulders. He wasn't hiding or ashamed or uncertain anymore. He was completely, utterly sure. The first time they ran into one of Alexander's ex-girlfriends, Eugene braced himself for awkwardness or drama. Instead, Jessica took one look at them together and smiled. "I'm happy for you," she told Alexander genuinely. "You look like yourself for the first time since I've known you." And it was true. Alexander did look like himself, more than Eugene had ever seen him. The constant underlying tension that had always seemed to follow Alexander was gone, replaced by a contentment and peace that transformed his entire demeanor. He laughed more, smiled more, seemed more present in every moment. "You make me feel like myself," Alexander told Eugene one night as they lay in bed together, Eugene's head on Alexander's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "With everyone else, I was always trying to be who I thought they wanted me to be. With you, I can just exist." Eugene pressed a kiss to Alexander's chest, right over his heart. "You never had to be anyone else for me. I fell in love with exactly who you are." "I know," Alexander said softly, his fingers combing through Eugene's hair. "That's why this works. That's why this feels so right." They talked about the future sometimes, tentatively at first, and then with growing confidence. Alexander wanted to meet Eugene's parents, wanted to take him home for holidays, wanted to build a life together that included all the normal, domestic things that Eugene had never dared to hope for. "I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life," Alexander told him one Sunday morning as they lay tangled together in bed, sunlight streaming through the windows. "That can be arranged," Eugene replied, his heart full to bursting with love and possibility. 6 months after that first kiss in the kitchen, Alexander moved into Eugene's bedroom officially, though he'd been sleeping there most nights anyway. They rearranged the furniture to make space for both of their belongings. And Eugene felt like he was living in a dream every time he opened the closet and saw their clothes hanging side by side. "I have something to tell you," Alexander said one evening as they cooked dinner together, the same domestic ritual that had become the foundation of their life together. Eugene looked up from the salad he was making, noting the nervous energy radiating from Alexander. "What is it?" Alexander took a deep breath, setting down his spatula and turning to face Eugene fully. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I wanted to make sure I was ready before I said anything." Eugene's heart began to race. "Said what?" "I want to come out, officially, I mean, not just to family and friends, but publicly. I want to write about my experience, about figuring out my sexuality later in life, about falling in love with my best friend." Alexander's voice was steady, but Eugene could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "I want other people who might be struggling with the same things to know they're not alone." Eugene stared at him, overwhelmed by love and pride and admiration for this man who had gone from confused and closeted to confident and proud in the span of 6 months. "Are you sure?" Eugene asked. "That's a big step." Alexander nodded. "I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything. I love you, I love us, and I'm not afraid of who knows it anymore." Eugene crossed the kitchen and pulled Alexander into his arms, kissing him deeply and thoroughly. "I'm so proud of you," he murmured against Alexander's lips. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Alexander replied. "You taught me how to be brave." "You were always brave," Eugene said. "You just needed to figure out what you were being brave for." Alexander's article was published 3 months later in a national magazine, a beautifully written piece about self-discovery and love and the courage it takes to live authentically. The response was overwhelming, with hundreds of people reaching out to share their own stories of late-in-life sexual awakening and the fear and joy that came with finally understanding themselves. "Look at this," Alexander said one evening, showing Eugene his laptop screen filled with messages from readers. "All these people saying our story gave them hope, gave them courage to explore their own feelings." Eugene read over Alexander's shoulder, his heart swelling with pride and love. "You're changing lives," he said softly. "We're changing lives," Alexander corrected. "This is our story, not just mine." And it was their story, Eugene realized. The story of a man who spent 3 years loving someone in silence, and a man who spent 3 years searching for something he didn't know he was looking for, until they found each other in the most unexpected and beautiful way possible. 1 year after that first confession in the kitchen, Alexander proposed. It wasn't elaborate or dramatic, just the two of them on their couch on a Tuesday night, Alexander suddenly getting down on one knee with a simple gold band and tears in his eyes. "I know we've only been together for a year," Alexander said, his voice shaking slightly, "but I've been yours for so much longer than that. I just didn't know it yet." He took a shaky breath. "Will you marry me, Eugene? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you the way you deserve to be loved?" Eugene was crying before Alexander even finished speaking, nodding frantically as he pulled Alexander up for a kiss that tasted like tears and laughter, and forever. "Yes," Eugene whispered against Alexander's lips. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Eugene's parents' backyard, surrounded by family and friends who had watched their love story unfold with joy and support. Alexander's sister Betty was his best woman, and Eugene's college roommate William stood up for him, and when they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. "3 years ago," Alexander said in his vows, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face, "I thought I knew who I was and what I wanted. I thought love was something that happened to other people. something I was somehow incapable of finding. And then you came into my life and showed me that love isn't something you find, it's something you recognize. You taught me that the best of love stories aren't about finding someone new, they're about finally seeing someone who was there all along. Eugene could barely speak through his own tears, but he managed to get through his vows, promising to love Alexander through all of life's changes and challenges, promising to be his safe harbor and his greatest adventure all at once. When they kissed at the altar, sealing their marriage and their love, Eugene felt like the luckiest man in the world. After years of hiding his feelings, years of watching Alexander with other people and wishing it could be him, he finally had everything he'd ever dreamed of and more. 2 years into their marriage, they bought a house together, a small craftsman bungalow with a garden that Alexander immediately began planning to fill with vegetables and flowers. Eugene watched from the kitchen window as Alexander worked in the dirt, his face bright with contentment, and marveled at how perfectly their lives had woven together. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked that evening as they sat on their back porch, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Just how happy I am," Eugene said honestly. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real, that we're really here together like this." Alexander reached over to take his hand, threading their fingers together in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "It's real," he said softly. "We're real and we're exactly where we're supposed to be." Eugene squeezed Alexander's hand, thinking about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The years of friendship, the painful confession, the tentative exploration, the growing confidence, the love that had bloomed between them like something inevitable and beautiful. "Do you ever regret it?" Eugene asked. "Taking so long to figure yourself out? Missing out on those years when we could have been together?" Alexander considered the question seriously, as he always did when Eugene asked about his journey to self-discovery. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been braver sooner," he admitted. "But then I think about how much I've learned about myself in the process, how much stronger our relationship is because we built it on friendship first. I think everything happened exactly when it was supposed to." Eugene nodded, understanding what Alexander meant. Their love story wasn't conventional, wasn't the kind of thing that happened in movies where people met and instantly knew they were meant to be together. It was messier than that, more complicated, built on years of patience and understanding and the courage to be vulnerable with each other. But it was theirs, and it was real, and it was beautiful in all its imperfect perfection. "I love our story," Eugene said softly. "I love that it took time, that it wasn't easy, that we had to work for it." "I love that you waited for me," Alexander replied. "I love that you loved me even when I didn't know how to love you back." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, hands linked, hearts full, surrounded by the life they'd built together. Eugene thought about that scared young man who had sat in his kitchen 3 years ago, afraid to tell his best friend the truth about his feelings, afraid of losing the most important relationship in his life. He could never have imagined that telling the truth would lead to this: a husband who loved him completely, a marriage built on honesty and trust and deep, abiding affection, a future full of possibility and promise. "Thank you," Eugene said suddenly. Alexander looked at him with curiosity. "For what?" "For being brave enough to question everything you thought you knew about yourself. For being open to the possibility that love might look different than you expected. For choosing me, choosing us, even when it was scary and uncertain." Alexander brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to Eugene's knuckles. "Thank you for loving me before I knew how to love myself. Thank you for being patient while I figured it out. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like." Eugene felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of love he felt for this man, who had started as his friend and become his everything. "I would do it all again," he said fiercely. "Every moment of pain, every year of waiting, every second of uncertainty. I would do it all again to end up right here with you." Alexander's smile was brilliant in the fading light. "So would I. Even the parts that hurt, even the confusion and the fear. It was all worth it to get to this." They made love that night with a tenderness that spoke of years of trust and intimacy, bodies moving together in perfect harmony, hearts beating in sync. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their bed, Alexander's head on Eugene's chest, Eugene's fingers combing through Alexander's hair. "I have something to tell you," Alexander said softly, his voice muffled against Eugene's skin. Eugene's hands stilled in Alexander's hair. "What is it?" Alexander lifted his head to look at Eugene, his expression serious but not worried. "I got a call today from a publisher. They want me to write a book about our story, about the experience of coming out later in life and finding love in unexpected places." Eugene's heart began to race with excitement. "Alexandrovich, that's incredible. What did you tell them?" "I told them I'd have to talk to my husband first," Alexander said with a smile. "Because it's not just my story to tell, it's ours." Eugene cupped Alexander's face in his hands, overwhelmed with love and pride. "I think you should do it. I think our story could help a lot of people." "Are you sure?" It would mean sharing some very personal details about our relationship, about your experience being closeted, about my journey to self-discovery. Eugene considered this, thinking about all the messages they'd received after Alexander's article was published. All the people who had reached out to say their story had given them hope or courage, or simply the knowledge that they weren't alone. "I'm sure," Eugene said finally, "if our story can help even one person feel less alone or find the courage to be honest about who they are, then it's worth sharing." Alexander's kiss was soft and grateful and full of love. "I love you so much," he murmured against Eugene Choi's lips. "I love you too," Eugene replied. "Always." The book took 2 years to write, with Alexander conducting interviews with Eugene about his experience, researching the science behind sexual fluidity and late-in-life coming out, and crafting their story into something that was both deeply personal and universally relatable. Eugene read every draft, offering feedback and corrections, amazed by Alexander's ability to capture not just the facts of what had happened, but the emotions behind them. When the book was finally published, it became an unexpected bestseller, resonating with readers who saw their own struggles reflected in Alexander and Eugene's journey. They did interviews together, appeared on talk shows, spoke at conferences about LGBTQ+ issues, and the importance of living authentically. "I never imagined our love story would become something that could help other people," Eugene said during one particularly moving interview, where they'd spoken with a young man who credited their book with helping him come out to his family. "Love stories aren't meant to be kept secret," Alexander replied, taking Eugene's hand on camera without self-consciousness. "They're meant to be shared, to give other people hope that love is possible for them too." 5 years after their first kiss, 10 years after they had first met, Eugene and Alexander were featured on the cover of a national magazine as one of the year's most inspiring couples. The photos showed them in their garden, Alexander's arms around Eugene from behind, both of them laughing at something the photographer had said, their love evident in every line of their bodies. "Look how far we've come," Alexander said that evening as they sat on their couch. The magazine spread open between them. Eugene studied the photo, remembering the scared young man he'd been when they first met, the confused and searching man Alexander had been, the long journey they'd taken to get to this place of happiness and security. "Sometimes I think about that night in the kitchen when I first told you I was gay," Eugene said softly. "I was so terrified that I was going to lose you. Instead, you found me," Alexander replied. "We found each other." Eugene looked at his husband, at the man who had been his best friend and was now his partner in everything, at the life they'd built together through patience and courage and unwavering love. "What do you think would have happened if I hadn't been brave enough to tell you the truth that night?" Eugene asked. Alexander considered this seriously. "I think we would have found our way to each other eventually. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe the path would have been different. But I believe we were always meant to be together. Some love is just inevitable." Eugene smiled, thinking about all the moments that had led them here, all the choices and chances and small acts of courage that had woven their lives together. "I like that," he said. "Inevitable love. The best kind," Alexander agreed, leaning over to kiss him softly. As they sat together in their living room, surrounded by the life they'd built and the love they'd nurtured, Eugene felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy, hadn't been simple, but it had been worth every moment of uncertainty and fear for the joy and peace they'd found together. Their love story wasn't the kind that happened overnight, wasn't the kind that was simple or straightforward, but it was theirs, and it was real, and it was beautiful in all its complexity and depth. And as Alexander pulled him closer, as they settled into the comfortable intimacy of a love that had been tested and proven strong, Eugene knew that this was exactly where he was meant to be. In Alexander's arms, in the life they'd built together, in the love they'd fought for and won, which brought them back to that moment in the doorway, 3 years after their first meeting, 6 months after their first kiss, with Alexander's hands cupping Eugene's face and 3 words hanging in the air between them like a promise. "Maybe let me," Alexander had whispered, and Eugene had felt his entire world shift on its axis. Now, as Eugene looked into Alexander's eyes and saw nothing but love and certainty and hope, he realized that this was the moment he'd been waiting for his entire life. Not just the moment when Alexander would love him back, but the moment when he would be brave enough to let himself be loved. "Okay," Eugene whispered, but his voice breaking on the word, "Let you." Alexander's smile was radiant as he leaned in to kiss Eugene again. Deeper this time, more certain. Eugene melted into the kiss, into Alexander's arms, into the promise of a future he'd never dared to hope for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Alexander rested his forehead against Eugene's. "I love you," Alexander said softly. "I'm in love with you, Eugene. I think I have been for a long time. I just didn't know how to recognize it." Eugene felt tears slip down his cheeks, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming love. "I love you too," he whispered. "I've loved you for so long I forgot what it felt like not to love you." Alexander's thumbs brushed away Eugene's tears, his touch infinitely gentle. "We're really doing this, aren't we? We're really going to try to." "We're going to do more than try," Eugene said, his voice stronger now, filled with conviction. "We're going to love each other the way we were always meant to." Alexander's laugh was bright and joyful as he pulled Eugene closer, spinning him around in the doorway of their apartment. "I can't believe it took me this long to figure out that what I was looking for was right here the whole time." "You figured it out when you were ready," Eugene said as Alexander set him down, his hands still framing Eugene's face. "That's all that matters." "What happens now?" Alexander asked, his voice soft with wonder. Eugene smiled, thinking about all the possibilities that stretched out before them, all the moments they would share, all the love they would build together. "Now we get to find out what forever looks like." Alexander's kiss was his answer, soft and sweet and full of promise. And as Eugene kissed him back, surrounded by the warmth of Alexander's love and the certainty of their future together, he knew that this was just the beginning of the most beautiful love story he could have ever imagined. They had found each other, finally and completely, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the months that followed, they would learn each other in new ways, would navigate the complexities of a relationship built on years of friendship, would face the challenges and joys that came with loving someone so completely. They would tell their families and friends, would weather the surprise and support and occasional confusion that came with such a significant revelation. But in that moment, standing in the doorway with Alexander's hands on his face and love shining in his eyes, Eugene knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had waited long enough, loved silently long enough, been patient long enough. Now it was time to love out loud, love completely, love the way they were always meant to love. And as Alexander whispered, "I love you," against his lips one more time, Eugene realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that caught you completely off guard, the ones that grew slowly from friendship into something deeper and more profound than anything you could have planned or expected. Sometimes the person you were meant to love was standing right beside you all along, waiting for the right moment, the right words, the right courage to finally let love bloom between you. Sometimes love wasn't about finding someone new, but about finally seeing someone who had been there all along. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that someone would look at you with wonder in their eyes and whisper, "Maybe let me." and change your entire world with 3 simple words. Eugene had been lucky enough to find that love, patient enough to wait for it, brave enough to fight for it when the moment finally came. And as he and Alexander stood together in their doorway, on the threshold of a new chapter in their love story, he knew that every moment of waiting, every tear shed in silence, every year of loving from a distance had been worth it for this. For love, for Alexander, for the beautiful, complicated, perfect life they were about to build together, for forever.